A very warm welcome to everyone. Uh, we would like to welcome you all to this masterclass being taken by Professor Vaibhav Bhamoriya from IIM Kashipur. In this masterclass, he'll be discussing the strategies that the top companies are adopting to achieve net zero. Under this, he will give you a glimpse on the technology side, the finance side, and what all the leadership is doing in terms of helping these companies achieve net zero. But before we move to the masterclass, allow me to quickly introduce you with Professor Weber and his profile. So, as you all must be knowing, or if not, let me tell you that currently he is serving as the assistant professor at IIM Kashipur, where he also imparts his duty as the area chairperson for the economics department. Apart from that, he is a fellow of IIM Ahmedabad and has over a decade of teaching experience at prestigious institutes like IIM Ahmedabad and IIM Indore. One of his key highlights of his teaching journey has been developing a course in managing sustainability with Professor T.R. Mohan, which received the global mention for the Page Prize in Sustainability Curriculum. Apart from that, he has been associated with well-renowned organizations, both government and private, and has been actively working in the sustainability domain. And his key goal is to improve the livelihood of the people and drive inclusive development. So please put a warm welcome to the professor, and I'll now give him the mic to start his class. Over to you, Professor.
Thanks a lot, everybody, and good evening, everybody. Welcome to this class, and I hope it's a mutually rewarding journey for us. Just to this thing, so me and Mohan started working on sustainability, seeing that there was a big gap on sustainability, training, awareness, and education in the industry. And we designed this course, and till date, it is the only course of its type to receive, the global mention. There's no other Indian course which has received a global mention. So, we still say that, okay, we are pioneers in that sense. But today, what we are, going to talk about is, what I want to talk about is this whole thing about, net zero. And, what we want to do is, net zero, started with this whole thing, when we started looking at resources and the consumption of resources and this whole debate about whether development was moving in the right direction or not. And we started looking at carbon footprinting. And, with carbon footprinting, the first thing came from the material chemistry side, and we started looking for changing the materials being used and just moving to materials which we thought had a lower carbon footprint. Very soon it led that, it was not just the processing that we were doing in the industries. It was not just, what was happening within the gates, the gate to gate, but, very soon it became cradle to gate. And then, slowly we wanted to move to cradle today. And, where we moved from carbon footprinting was to a life cycle analysis, we were having a focus on the entire value chain. And these process innovations slowly, they were built up into business innovations, and we formulated certain businesses, which are based on the whole premise of, this whole thing of, being carbon neutral, and that has happened. But interestingly, this is not it. What we are actually trying to talk today is that why is the firm at the top going for net zero? This still remains, if a firm is already a market leader, or they already hold, a lion's share in the market, or they are maintaining, high profits and they're one of the most profitable firms in the market. Why is it that they are looking at net zero? Right? That's one thing that we are doing. And the obvious answer is that either, they're doing it to for higher profits, or the fact that they feel that their profits may be, in the future challenged, and hence, they want to sustain their profits, or are they really trying to safeguard their future? So the logic that we need the planet to have a future, so are they really keying into that? And so this is happening. But the very interesting comes if we turn it on its table and we start looking at that, okay, why are challengers also believing the story of net zero? So if we a market leader believes it, it's probably easy. But when you look at the challenger side, I think so, the race for net zero becomes much more understandable. A lot of challengers are seeing net zero as a huge possibility to upset the market, which means that it's an opportunity through which I can snatch that market leadership, that lion's share of the market, even, sort of that profitability from the leader in the market, and I can become this. Which means that net zero is not just a space which is about absolutely about the planet and sort of the environment alone. It's also now a competitive space. People are vying for it. There's competition in it, and we are seeing shades of it. And what we are saying is that sort of while initially maybe people were looking at price leadership and using net zero as something that could be a marketing tool for them, and which also means that a lot of people, if they stop at price leadership and claiming that they're green, probably sort of you also have the pitfall that you could be falling into the trap of greenwashing. But we move a little ahead, pick up that old school thought about, changing materials and finding stuff, becoming more energy efficient. Probably, sort of we are looking at cost leadership also. Combine the two together, probably, sort of this is where it starts to get interesting and you're looking at profit leadership. And, sort of this is where, sort of this competition is happening. But in the long run, now what we are really talking about, so it's not just mere pledges, but where we are moving away from pledges to actual action now is that people want to build business models which are profitability oriented, and net zero drives that possibility. So I'm not looking at net zero as a outcome of my business model, but I'm saying, can net zero drive my business model? And right, so I'm looking for profitability leadership and not just profit leadership for a short time now. And so, sort of, so we wanted to look at, okay, what are the top firms doing? And we thought and we said, okay, sort of probably it makes sense to divide the top firms also into groups and see, sort of differences between them. So, sort of there could be top firms globally, there could be top firms locally. So I am based in India. So for me, the locally becomes India. And what are the net zero leaders in the world doing? Because the top firms globally and locally may or may not be the net zero leaders. So we try to figure out what are they doing similar, right? Now this is where sort of our partner company PV Manifold comes in very handy. They work across 60 different countries. They have a history of sort of 2 decades of sort of being in this space, and they have a huge amount of data. And then when we looked at the data, what we found out was three similarities in the top firms globally: technology, financing, and leadership. These seem to be the pillars on which net zero is right now functioning. And any company which is at the top and trying to do something on net zero is definitely working on technology, financing, and leadership. So, three things that everybody is doing, but which also gave us a more interesting question: what are they doing different from each other? Right. And so, what we did is we started searching for a good database, and we found this Forbes has this net zero leaders database. And we looked at the current rankings 2025, and what we found by analyzing it, right? That's what we want to perform. But, sort of, let's say in the chat box, please feel free to, sort of respond to this. Any guesses for the names, do you think, who are the top performers in this net zero function across the globe, globally, locally? Yes. Can some of you want to guess some names? Whom do you think is the best performing, sort of organization net zero wise globally? Shell, Patagonia, very interesting. Microsoft, okay, right, okay, uh-huh. And sort of more interestingly, so Amazon, Jeff Bezos, okay, very interesting. And sort of we want to figure out, okay, what are they doing to be at the top? That's the core thing that we want to find out. That what are they doing to be at the top? And sort of we just looked into this. And what we found with the global top companies is a very, very interesting thing. Global companies seem to have broad commitments rather than narrow, specific commitments. They seem to have broad commitments, and probably these are co-terminus with complex challenges because they are large behemoths spread over multiple geographies, multiple sectors. Their complexity levels are high, which is why probably they still have broad commitments. So they are still into long-term pledges, 2040, 50. Right. And in a while, once I come to my next slides and the slides after that, you'll understand why we are calling this long-term pledges, because we are living in a country like India, which has taken a pledge of 2070. Right. So why is it that we still call 2040, 50 a long-term? This thing by aligning climate goals. Diversified operations is what they're doing because of their vast global footprints. They have diversified operations, sort of which is the complexity is coming from. They're looking at technology-led solutions. So, but what the type of technology they're looking at is AI, renewables, carbon removal technology, right? These are the stuff that is very, very common over there. Now, this may be very different from what is happening in India. This may be somewhat different from what net zero leaders are doing, and we'll come to that, sort of in the due course of slides. They are trying to do a lot of ESG integration. So sustainability is being embedded into the governance and financial planning. What we are also hearing in India now very commonly is that why only pledges? Let's put an action, sort of before the pledge, so that, sort of it's not that every year you just have to write a report. Let's put the action so that, sort of whatever needs to go into the report keeps on happening on its own. And the report becomes an easy thing to write. And, sort of it's not a one off exercise every year that we are doing. And what this means is that, sort of we are using the older concepts, a new application of net zero. And what is happening is that supply chain engagement is becoming important because, sort of in an effort to decarbonize, Puma told this to the world in 2010 through their environment profit and loss statement that yes, 56% of their emissions were coming from tier 4 suppliers and only 6% of their emissions were coming from Puma offices or directly from Puma. And so sort of very similar. So you need to work on the supply chain engagement to be able to do anything. So what we have done is we have compiled all this information, top Indian companies and global companies, into this one small table. It might look a little cramped, but this is the state of affairs in one shot if you go. So, so this is where you also realize. So Indian companies, 2040 to 2070, globally aggressive targets are there, 2030 to 2050. The laggards are 2050 over there. In India, the advanced guys are at 2040. Scope 3 emissions, in India, we're looking at, it's an emerging focus, especially in supply chains, but there's a very strong emphasis. Life cycle tracking and reduction is also happening with the global top players. AI for carbon tracking, carbon capture, and circular design is a common thing for global majors. We are talking about, sort of bypassing this whole carbon thing, moving to green hydrogen. So we are saying that, okay, instead of fossil fuels, which have a CH3 and, a structure, why not move to just a hydrogen so that you have no carbon involved? And that becomes my carbon removal, sort of right at the base. And it's a viable idea. It's, so what India is trying to do is India is trying to leapfrog the carbon removal and capture technology into a hydrogen technology where I don't need carbon. So we are trying to do what we did with IT, jump the laptop revolution and get into the mobile straight away. So we are talking of EVs, smart grids, renewable energy. Slight difference you can see between the global and the Indian companies. Innovation speed is moderate in India, but it is very fast, iterative, and often startup style innovation, sort of being very agile, nimble with the global agencies. We have an issue that we are tied to legacy infrastructure. So you want to do something with power, but we have our own, sort of issues with power, that power plants are not too old. Money has been put into it. So, so all that comes into the picture. ESG integration is deep ESG integration into finance and governance, right? So it is at the level of finance and day-to-day governance that ESG integration is happening globally. In India, it's still in a board level oversight is required, and we are still talking about a CSR committee and an ESG committee at the board level formation. Disclosures are growing, so sort of we are just catching on to the bandwagon. Carbon offsetting in India is about forestry, renewable credits, community projects, whereas sort of we are looking at advanced offers of direct air capture, nature-based solutions globally. The transparency is a very, very important feature. And, there are real-time dashboards, verified data, high transparency globally. Indian firms are still struggling, and we are trying to find that, okay, sort of can we improve our disclosures? Only some firms are, becoming comfortable with third-party audits, and we are just starting to turn the leaf on this. Community engagement is still focused on CSR, rural development, water positivity in India, the problems which probably, sort of are more closer to us. Globally, the firms are more talking about global partnership, climate coalitions, and supplier training, right? So they're looking at, sorry, right? And if you look at community engagement, that's what's happening. In sectoral focus, you can see a clear divide. Automotive is there in both. Energy is part of, sort of both. But India, it's steel, IT, FMCG. Globally, it is technology, consumer goods, and aviation, which is at the focus. In terms of notable companies, Microsoft, somebody said in the chat, yes, it is there. Apple is there. Tesla is there. Johnson and Johnson is there. And yes, Bezos, Amazon is there. These are the top companies. Infosys from India, Tata Steel, Mahindra, ITC, Reliance, right? So not too many, sort of shockers over here. But let's move ahead. And if you see, okay, so what are the best net performers of best performers in net zero, sort of what do they have to offer to us? And when we look to it, is they are saying is that they are not just looking at scope one and scope two. So within the emissions, they're not just looking on, we have this model and we say that, okay, there are scope one, scope two, scope three emissions. Scope one is, directly up to my emissions, which are direct to my processes. Scope two is, sort of my energy profile and, the stuff that I'm buying. Scope three is my suppliers and my indirect thing. So the indirect part is very difficult to work on. And we find that when we look at global high performers in net zero, they seem to have a mastery on this difficult problem of scope three. They know how to reduce emissions in the supply chain, which are the hardest to tackle, and they are making, large progresses over there. So clearly what emerges is that, sort of the focus of existing players with these players who are disrupting this whole market with net zero is very, very different, which means that ideally my strategy, my mindset needs to be very, very different. Now, when my strategy will be different, my actions will be different. When my actions will be different, the type of finances that I will need might also be different. And to have the different mindset, I need people in the decision making, in the boardroom, in the executive, top management who think differently. So technically, I'm saying that I need my technical part, my technology part, my finance part, and my leadership part to be very, very different, right? So while the top companies seem to behave in a particular way and they are faced with challenges of complexity and diversity, but those who are disrupting the market are taking things in a very different way and they have mastery over scope three. They have a very, very strong lifestyle emission focus. So there's this company called Rivian. So they have cut down the lifetime footprint of their products by 15% in 1 year flat, right? So what usually becomes, sort of a type of thing that people, are doing over 4 or 5 years, they've been able to achieve that in 1 year because their focus is very different. The innovation cycles are rapid over here. Smaller size, focused missions allow faster pivots and, sort of trials for adoption, which means that my innovation cycles are rapid. So whereas, sort of a large company, probably, sort of does one trial in a year. These guys are probably doing 3 to 4, at times maybe up to 10 trials in a year. The metrics are more transparent. Emissions data is granular, verified, publicly tracked, which means that I am not worried about legalities, getting caught in people trying to tell me that my data is not good, but I'm actually forging partnerships across my organization with the larger society and trying to get more inputs. Okay, this is my data. How can I be better? If you point out something at me, I'm going to say, okay, let's work on it and let's make this better. And sort of so make this whole transparency is being used in a very different way by these guys. And we are disrupting the industry because we are redefining these sectors. So sort of EV is a sector in which there are new players coming in. Green aviation is coming in a big way. Sustainable packaging is coming in a big way. In fact, sort of, so I'm based in a small town called Kashipur, and not too far away from here we have Rudrapur, and the Japanese have come in over here, and there's a company called Hutumaki. So Hutumaki is into sustainable packaging and they're doing some wonderful work out of this place. So nondescript places, but people are trying to do some great work. So to give you a snapshot, let's look at, okay, what is happening? So what we see net performers across the globe, the best players seem to be from the automotive sector. It is not the names that we talked about. It is Lucid Group. They're into automobiles. They're into automobiles in the USA. They have a plant in Saudi Arabia, and they're near zero product use emissions. And they are doing a lot of EV innovations. Now, very interesting about the Lucid Group is when did they start worrying about all this sustainability, ESG, net zero bit? 2021. So probably they're very, very new entrants. Their website claims that they are just starting out. And they're claiming that they have a good baseline and they're just starting out to do things. But they seem to be one of the best performers globally, which is the interesting part. Rivian that I mentioned on my last slide, scope three reductions are sort of very, very good. Life cycle carbon tracking is there. Tesla is doing great in terms of scaled EV production. The battery circularity, which seems to be the biggest problem with EVs, they're trying to tackle it. By the way, Lucid is also trying to do this. Uh, Philip Morris International, supply chain optimization, renewable energy, right? So that's the focus. American Airlines, aviation, sustainable aviation fuel. The biggest expenditure item that I have, in terms of molecules, the most, sort of recurring thing where I use the maximum number of molecules, material, transportation, carbon emissions, energy, everything comes down to aviation fuel. So they're focusing on that and they're looking at modernizing their entire fleet for efficiency, right? So, guys, what are the key difference between global top companies and the net zero performers? So when we compare the Microsofts of the world and the Amazons of the world with Lucid, Rivian, and these companies, the scale is massive for these global top companies. These guys are focused and often single sector companies, right? So they're not present in multiple sector, which means that the complexities of their own business are limited, right? So probably if we break it down and we do it, we are able to achieve higher efficiencies as of now. They also have a stricter timeline. They're looking at 2030, whereas most of the global companies, because they're large elephants, they're looking at 2040. Right. So while I say this, it would also mean that, sort of when these global top companies turn a page, the the cumulative effect could be huge because these are like cheetahs running fast, these are like elephants moving slow, right? And the innovation speed is slower, their innovation speed is fast, iterative. They are more like trying things and figuring it out. That's happening. But at the same time, they're using a lot of science. So, sort of most of these companies that you found in the names, whether they were top Indian performers, top global performers, or net zero performers, one thing in common is they are all into what we call as science based targets. So, they're not just doing targets for the sake of it, they're going after science based targets, right? Reporting transparency is improving for the global top companies. It is very high and verified. So, if you're a new player, you have the edge that you start at a level which is, sort of very high and you don't have to pull people up. That's where, sort of your barriers to being in the value chain are set up. So, while the global top companies are following broad ESG metrics, there are specific carbon reduction outcomes. So, the net zero outcomes seem to be better for these players rather than the broad outcomes. Right, guys? So this is where, sort of I'd just like to, talk about these two companies. Sort of this is there. I don't have slides about them, but I'll just talk about them. So, guys, one company is this company called Lucid. Now, Lucid is a very, very interesting, sort of organization. It is based in the US. And based in the US, sort of they started looking at it. They started making automobiles. And in 2020, when they started collecting data, and they said that, okay, what are in the business and how can we really impact? And they figured out that, okay, sort of what should be the target? And they said, okay, our target is not just in the production cycle. We also have to look at the use case. So, how does carbon get reduced in the usage of the product when the car is being used? Now, they're into all electric vehicles, not hybrids, right? So, they're into all electric vehicles. And they said that, okay, the best way to reduce this will be when the battery requirement is lower, the battery charging requirement is lower, because what they discovered is that globally, a large part of my power generation, energy generation is still fossil fuel based. And till the time that remains, even though my manufacturing cycle is all clean, my battery is all clean, but the charging of my battery being more frequent than any other thing means that, sort of it is going to be my biggest part in the carbon footprint. And focusing on that, they said that, sort of my biggest thing that makes a difference is the efficiency of the battery, in not in terms of sort of its life or other thing. What they're saying is that what you're looking at is miles per kilowatt hours. So energy efficiency in terms of what is the range anxiety. So the range anxiety is that if I have a fossil fuel car, probably in one tank full I go up to something like 410 450 miles. If I have sort of so when these guys started out in 2021, the average range of an electric vehicle was 234 kilometers. They have been able to bring it up to five, they're now in the range of 460 to 510, 560, sort of kilometers, which means that you can, on a single charge, you charge your vehicle in Los Angeles and you can reach San Francisco in one thing. That's how they're positing it. But what it also means is that I need fewer charges for my battery as I run my vehicle more and more kilometers. Uh, if I need fewer charges for my battery, I need fewer reliance on the carbon, uh, sort of emissions, because the power required to charge the battery is less. And because my range is more, the battery changing also happens in much more, sort of larger time, because it's, sort of the life of battery is dependent on how many charges I'm doing and how efficiently I'm doing. So Peter Rawlinson, their CEO, continues to say that efficiency is what is driving us, and we'll keep on focusing on efficiency. And by focusing on efficiency, they have been able to bring down, they're saying that they'll bring down their scope 1 and scope 2 emissions in Girthe. They're already focusing on scope 3 emissions, and it's all available in public. And how they pose it now is very interesting. They say, sort of, okay, if this remains only to Lucid, how much do we benefit? And they say Lucid alone is not going to make the difference to the planet. So they say, what if we make this technology available for everybody? And so they are willing to partner with everybody. And they're saying that, okay, by 2030 in America, there'll be 350 million cars. And if we say that the energy to drive these cars is going to be equivalent to like 113 million households in America. But if you use the technology that Lucid has, and you can cut down the energy requirements, and the energy requirement is cut down by the equivalent of 21 million households. Now, what does 21 million households mean for US? It means the number of households that currently exist in California, Oregon, and Washington together. And that's the impact they're trying to create. They're saying that, okay, if we can make this technology available to everybody, the impact is huge. So they are not just looking at using this for themselves. The market leadership is coming from bringing a technology, making it available from the market. And I am now not just disrupting market in terms of competition. I'm disrupting the market in terms of sort of everything that they are doing. Uh, yeah, I see there's a hand raised. Yes, Rajesh ji, you want to say something?
Hello?
Yeah. Yes.
Hello, for whom or for which companies setting this net zero target is compulsory or must?
Oh, well, so it is no more, so, sort of, so I'll say that, sort of, it is not just it is this approach that for whom it is a must is something that we are doing only in India. Across the globe, especially in US and the Europe, you're finding that sort of most of the organizers are doing it because they have long range sort of predictive models into the future. And one of the issues that they're facing with their long range predictive models is that if the planet and the resource usage is not sort of available, resources are not available, then their businesses seem to falter. Right. So, sort of that is going to happen. So it's more of a voluntary thing. It started with pledges, but now from pledges, it is moving to people moving to action. Right. So pledges were never made, sort of for something that was compulsory. They were well voluntary, and we are moving from voluntary pledges to voluntary action now.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Okay, guys, so we'll go back. This is what was happening with Lucid. In India, sort of the company that I would like to highlight is Mahindra. So what is Mahindra doing? Mahindra is doing, very interesting work. Mahindra has, sort of the group has more than 20, sort of companies in this thing, and they're trying to do something. And Mahindra has a very aggressive target by Indian segments. So, sort of while they are saying that, okay, our pledges that they have taken is like 2040. Oh, yes. And by the way, Lucid has not taken any public pledge also. They're just doing it because they're saying this is what our business model is, right? So they don't even have a pledge, Rajeshji. Interestingly, it's not mandatory. They don't have a pledge, and yet they are the world leaders in it because it's a part of my business model itself. Right. So Mahindra has a public pledge by 2040. I want to achieve something. I want to reduce my scope 1 and scope 2 emissions by 40%. And I want to do a 30% sort of scope 3 emission per product sold reduction by sort of by 2040 is what they're looking at. They want to achieve it much sooner. In fact, they're trying to see if they can achieve it by 2034 is what they're trying to do now. And interestingly, sort of Mahindra is focusing on scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 in a big way. And sort of apart from this, what also becomes very interesting is that Mahindra is trying to bring around a lot of technology into the picture, and sort of they're trying to do it, but they're also focusing on scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. They're trying to work with their suppliers to on the scope 3. It's much more difficult in India. The supplier preparedness is low. Scope 1, scope 2 are better, but at the same time, so Mahindra started this journey in 2020 before Lucid. And then what happened in 2020 was that Mahindra vehicles started becoming very popular. And what we also noticed was that, sort of the whole thing sort of the whole sort of the entire emission levels increased very suddenly from 2019 to 2020. And that's when Mahindra said that, sort of we must do something. So while, sort of for Mahindra, the per product levels, the per unit levels of emission did not increase a lot. But they became worried because suddenly they were selling so much that, sort of the entire level jumped, from, I think so, from 5.5 million COE equivalents to something like 18.3 million equivalents, something like that happened with them. And so Mahindra is doing leadership changes also happening, sort of. So Lucid wants everybody in the team to do it. Lucid has, people at the senior. So the ESG team of Lucid has nobody below a senior VP or a senior president level. People all above them are part of the ESG, and that's the focus they are driving. Everybody is part of it. It has to be it. Efficiency, efficiency, efficiency. Mahindra is also having an ESG committee. They're doing a lot. So they have a separate division which is working on the technology, a separate division which is working on finances. Mahindra also has, by the way, floated green bonds, and stuff that is happening. So I'll just take you back to the slides to put it back into perspective. Yeah, guys. So what we are saying is, right? So guys, what we are now, sort of trying to talk about is, if we look at this whole thing is, if you look at the finance part is very interesting, because what is happening is, my green bonds are becoming, sort of a very, very important part, sort of my green bonds are important so far, and also, sort of my carbon pricing is becoming very important. And when I look at it, so what is happening is, so I have my, sort of direct carbon pricing, which is becoming, very interesting and, sort of very important for organizations globally. At the same time, sort of what is also becoming very, very, sort of important globally is the green bonds. So Lucid, like for example, they have been able to launch 1.25% of their senior notes as green bonds, and they have received certification as green bonds because of the type of efficiency increases that they are bringing, and they're promising to the market. So which means that they have been able to raise capital to the tune of 2.1 billion dollars, right, and all in a very short duration. So while India is also now trying to move, and a lot of Indian companies are moving to sort of climate aligned finance raising, but sort of what we are still looking is, we are looking at government benefits. We are looking at sort of easy finance in the name of green coming in. But do we really have science-based, third-party audited, verified public data behind it? That's where we probably are still lacking. Which is very difficult for the global leaders also, because they are sort of complicated businesses. So sort of, can you apportion for each business and share for each location is a difficulty with them. So it looks as if they are clouding the data, but that it's actually difficult data to translate. The net zero guys, being focused on a single sector, are finding it very, very easy to move in a particular way. And they're really, taking it by storm, and they're doing some things, in a very, very interesting way. So green bonds are there, sort of very, very this thing. But not just that. What is also happening is, these global majors and sort of the most of the net zero leaders, what they are sort of doing very, very interestingly is that they are doing a carbon pricing mechanism. And by doing a carbon pricing mechanism internal to their organization, so which is based on the materiality of my organization and the opportunity cost that I face. When I'm taking my internal decisions of track A versus track B, decision A versus decision B, strategy A versus strategy B, action A versus action B, at that time, I'm using this carbon pricing mechanism to say, okay, which is going to be my best way ahead. So I'm not only looking at carbon, sort of emission mitigation, but I'm also looking at the pricing of it. And so, sort of, which means that this whole thing has gone down to the level of financing. Finance, not just in trying to attract investment, but in trying to generate finance from within the organization itself. So, which means that my business model has net zero integrated into, sort of the actions. So my carbon pricing, internal carbon pricing, enables me to look at, sort of my internal costing, my external pricing, and as a result of that, my internal margins itself, right? And this is where, sort of my decisions itself are starting to move in a different way. Now comes the most interesting part. How do I really push this through in an organization, because what it really means is that the organization needs to start working on different metrics, right? So how does a new car entrant in today's world, that somebody entering in 2021 say, I'm going to work on range anxiety and I'm going to work on the kilometer per, sort of kilometers per kilowatt hour. Yes, Sangeeta ji, you have a question. Sangeeta Pashine has a question. She's raised her hand. Please. Yeah. Yes, Sangeeta ji, can you unmute and say? Okay, I think so there's some error. So while Sangeeta ji comes in, right, guys. So what I was trying to say is that sort of these guys are trying to look at these decisions. Internal carbon pricing mechanisms is coming in very handy, and now the issue is that how do we really get these things rolling? Yes, Sangeeta ji, you want to say? I see
Yes,
that.
sir. I was asking about the carbon pricing you were saying. So, how the carbon emission discounting and carbon emission reduction is related? I want to know about what is emission discounting.
Okay, so emission discounting is something else. What I'm talking about is the internal carbon pricing. So what I do is I look at the materiality of my organization towards different forms of
Okay.
carbon. And then I say that, okay, suppose if I'm say, okay, I want to do business in Cambodia or should I do business in Japan? Just as a hypothetical example I'm taking. Now, doing business in Cambodia would mean a particular type of carbon. In terms of the carbon molecules and the form of carbon that I'll be dealing with is going to be different from the form of carbon and the molecules that I'll be dealing in Japan, right? Which means that I am not just going to look at the carbon emission, I'm looking at carbon oxide, equivalence, but I'm also looking at what is more, and I'm able to price the form of carbon which is more material to me at a higher price compared to another form of carbon. Okay, so I'm not imputing a value from a global model directly, but I am doing it through my materiality, which means that my internal pricing represents the importance of that to my organization and my sector much more. Okay. Uh, okay, that's first part. Second part is doing is I'm also looking at the opportunity cost, which means that if I don't put this money in this, whatever I am now investing in this terms of carbon based on this materiality to my organization, what if I invested it into other parts of the business? What would be the outcomes that I could get for it? And if those outcomes are better than the sort of outcomes that I'm getting from this internal carbon thing that I'm doing, then I would probably choose decision B instead of decision A. So what I'm saying is that based on this internal carbon pricing, this is based on my materiality, I may be choosing A, but if the opportunity cost says that no, you are better off, choosing B, then I have this thing. And when I combine this two with an internal carbon pricing mechanism, that's when I say, okay, on one side is my opportunity cost, one side is the benefit that I get based on my internal pricing mechanism. Let's bring this cost and benefit together and do an internal carbon pricing based cost benefit analysis. And that's when I decide between A and B, right? Which seems to mean that, sort of because this is something I am able to use my opportunity cost and my internal pricing, my materiality, my employees are able to see, sort of the direct relationship with the business, which brings in a different thing, right? So which is the third part that I was getting to, that the people and the leadership come in very, very important over here, because what we are saying over here is that that leadership what we need now is of the type which helps me sort of find those business metrics, those pathways, those strategies, those decisions, and the metrics that I'm using for coming to choices, making choices which align not only with what I think, but we are aligning with this science based approach and are able to generate profit, which means that I don't have to now start seeing that I need to make an extra effort for net zero. It's not an extra thing, it is part of my daily business, and if I keep on doing my daily business, the net zero results would flow, right? That's the major difference that I'm saying. So I'm not saying that, okay, I'm going to add one more KPI or KRA into your bag now. So suppose I'm a middle level manager, and what we are saying is that we need top management and leadership of the type that says that, okay, we want to do net zero along with whatever business we are, but we also want net zero to drive our profitability. in that means that we have to identify the right matrix. Like Rawlinson said that, sort of till the time, sort of this is happening, we are going to stay focused on the fact that efficiency itself will drive, the net zero values for Lucid. And so, sort of given that, now what do I tell my middle management? So I tell my middle management, you just focus on technology, which gives me a higher range. Focus on a technology which allows the battery to, sort of be doing more charging, being charged a more number of times, and probably, sort of. So I need to establish fewer charging stations because the range is higher. I need to establish sort of I need to rely on lesser amount of power which is coming from fossil fuels, and which is giving the entire. So it's not just the car industry, but the transportation industry and the power industry and the larger economy at all, sort of which can benefit from it. So that's I'm doing. But what was this middle level manager was doing? Middle level manager was doing just his task in the terms of KPI, and there was no additional KPI for him. Probably the number of KPIs were the same as they were before. Right? I hope that answers and also explains the leadership part for most people. What these guys are looking at in terms of leadership. Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. Yeah. So guys, sort of what are we really looking for over here? So, what I'm trying to say is that, this is just the surface. So I'm just, trying to look at this and handle in this, class at a very, very surface level. And I'm trying that, sort of probably there's a lot of difference right at the strategic level that we are seeing between global majors, Indian majors, and what I'm calling as net zero leaders. Right. And so, what it appears right now is net zero appears to be like a fast moving train. Right. So there's some people who are on the train already and they're running. And if I'm a new organization, I want to get it. It looks like, sort of I'm standing on the platform and it's this, and I don't know how to get onto a moving train. Right. So if I am not started on net zero, probably what it feels like is, I'm seeing this thing go pass by and, sort of, so I haven't started doing AI and I want to start doing AI and I'm still trying to figure out where do I start learning? Similar is the case with net zero, right? So Lucid is already doing this. So now what should I do? Right. So, sort of, you have only two choices. You can either get on it or you can stay out. And what I'm saying is that if you're afraid of bruises, you'll stay out and others will move ahead because they're already onto that train and the train is moving. But if you risk getting bruised and bored, slowly you'll be part of the bandwagon. So what you're saying is these guys didn't invent this in one go. They're all learning. So Lucid, Rivian, sort of Johnson and Johnson, all of these guys, sort of Philip Johnson, Philip Morris International. These are guys who are, sort of slowly figuring it out. Okay, what needs to be done? What needs to be focused on? We are all trying to do it, right? So the science behind this is all coming in. The science of management behind this is starting to come into place. While there's a lot of science available, but using the right science in terms of technology is what we are starting to discover. The science of management is just starting to come into place. So it's a very good point to board this net zero, sort of bandwagon right now. But yes, let's do it with the, sort of more clear goals of we want to disrupt the market. We want to challenge the leadership. So challenge the leadership does not mean that if I don't get the market leadership, I failed. But even if I move from category 2 to category 1 level of players, I have made a significant difference to myself. And, probably from me, from there, staying at tier 2 and catapulting to the next level, what is going to come after this is going to be more difficult. So getting into tier 1 and catapulting into, sort of the next future that is going to come beyond this is going to be much more easier. Right. And what we are trying to say over here is that, IIM Kashipur and PV Manifold Academy, evACAD, we are trying to bring an exciting opportunity, right? So we want, sort of to figure out much more things about this and, sort of, we want to figure out, sort of things and, sort of, so what we're trying to do is, sort of, we are bringing together the knowledge band. So, sort of our capability at IIM Kashipur of looking at the academics of it. Today I have not used a lot of research in it, but I've used, sort of very, very basic stuff. But still the, sort of the findings are very interesting. And I thought, there's a story that is waiting to be told over here. And, many questions that a lot of Indian organizations have can be answered with very easy stuff right now. Right? That's what we are looking at. And so this is where we are. And yes, while we open up to sort of the discussions at this point, right? And for those of you who want to get in touch, please note my email ID and please feel free to reach out to me. There's a question that is there in the Q&A box. Let me address that. So Ramaswamy ji is asking, what could be the target of Indian cities in terms of urban mobility for offsetting carbon emission? So Ramaswamy ji, I think so. India is a country which is full of diversity. And the diversity means that, sort of in India, one district is like one European country. So I am not going to get into, sort of get trapped into trying to answer this with one answer. But yes, let us try and figure out, different characteristics. So, sort of if there are, sort of there are issues. So Mumbai is built, sort of more in a linear fashion. And from a linear fashion, now the Pune highway is, developing onto it. So there's a particular development. Delhi works in a very different way. Delhi is a large circular city and, it works in a very, very different way. Right. So when Delhi works in a very, very different way, probably the solutions that I will come up is also going to be, sort of very, very differently. Right. And not just this, sort of what is also very interesting is whereas if I look at, sort of cities like Ahmedabad, Ahmedabad itself is a circular city. Great, but we have a lot of commotion that happens. So people from Ahmedabad going to Rajkot, people from Ahmedabad going to Baroda, Anand, those places, Nadiad, even up to Bombay and stuff, right? And so, sort of it will have a different solution. So, the data is going to change, the movement is going to change. So somewhere, you might find that yes, public transport is great. Public transport in general should be doing fine, but sort of okay. Uh, should we also just ride the bandwagon where we move away from fossil fuel based stuff and we get into hydrogen based stuff? Is a real possibility, right? So which is what we are trying to do. So it's great, and sort of that I think so. Sort of we need to try out multiple things. We need to sort of more characterize these problems yet. We have not been able to characterize these problems sort of very well as of yet. That's where I would see it. Yeah, Sham has a question, and Sham is saying, what about net zero in the context of agriculture, consisting fragmented land holding by small farmers? Yeah, so Sham, this is a very interesting, sort of, yes. So anything that we want to do, the unit level economics of its adoption becomes very, very adverse and is usually, sort of why nothing seems to work in the agriculture sector unless until there's a huge fat subsidy attached to it, and the subsidy then creates its own distortion of market forces and the pursuit of efficiency. So sort of I'm being an economist, I'm not a great fan of subsidies, but at the same time sort of if you don't have subsidies, probably the unit economics is very adverse for the smallholder farmers. Very true. But what is doing is, so sort of there's a report by PV Manifold Academy, sort of let me just see if I can share that. I think so I have that report open with me on one other place. Let me just see. Yeah, yeah. So this is called the pure report, productive use of renewable energy. Sort of that they call it. I'm just going to make you show this thing, right? So this is a report that is over here, right? So this was done by IKEA Foundation and P Manifold. They did it together, and they're looking at how to use renewable energy in the agriculture value chain, market assessment, and they come up with some very beautiful stuff in this report. And sort of they're saying that okay, can we go down to every type of sort of agriculture and where is energy being used, and then can we focus on how to replace sort of fossil fuel energy with energy, and what are the numbers, sort of thing. So this is a report which takes a very, very sort of deep dive into it. Sorry, I just, yeah, so it goes into a very, very deep dive, looks at okay, sort of what are business models, are they mature, are they startup type, right? So sort of those type of these typologies are now available with us. And net zero in the context of agriculture is sort of if the concept may be new, but we have a range of practices, and probably sort of we just need to choose. So sort of let's look at solar irrigation. So sort of I around the time when I launched this course on sustainability, I was looking at solar irrigation, and I visited Bihar. And I got to know that, solar irrigation was becoming very popular in Bihar at that time, and largely because the on-grid electricity was poor. So people wanted to move on a reliable source of off-grid. So it had nothing to do with net zero and stuff, but the net zero benefits came through at that time, right? Probably when even credits were not available. Now with the Bihar grid electricity becoming much better than what it was now, the solar revolution is going down over there, which is, the subsidy based. But a lot of farmers are now trying to do it because I have the control on power. And it also meant a huge behavioral change, and not just sort of these small fragmented land holding unit economics, because my usual pump gives me a water which looks like a huge amount of water is flowing, gushing out of the pump. Whereas sort of the same amount of water over a day could be collected by a small 2 HP pump that you would require a 10 HP pump to that would run for 2 hours. And sort of practically the same amount could a simple pump of 2 HP, sort of solar pump could give you. So the choices, you have to get down to that deep level. So you start at one level, you say, okay, what are the different activities? What are the different energy profiles? What are the different equipment that use energy? What are the different options in terms of renewables? And then can I move to it? And how do I take carbon out of the picture? Is it efficiency? Is it replacement? And you get into those characterizations, and that is what works. Yeah. Yes, Rajesh, you have something? Rajesh wants to say something, and there are some questions in the chat. Okay. Yeah. So we have opened the question Q&A. Rajesh, okay.
No, nothing specific. I was just.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Right. So how the coal-based thermal power plant can improve its net zero? Okay, so how does a coal-based thermal power plant can improve its net zero? Okay, so can a coal-based thermal power plant turn net zero, guys? Okay, so on the look of it, until and still sort of we don't replace coal with something else, it's not going to happen. But if we improve on the efficiency of conversion, energy produced per sort of unit of coal, I think so. There's a huge scope of improving the net zero to sort of, I may not become net zero, but I may not be as dirty a business as I am right now, because let's see it, sort of when we burned coal, how much energy are we really, how much of its potential calorific value are we trying to utilize, and that's not very high. So if we can move to higher technology, and if we can make technological advancements in utilizing, sort of this whole calorific value of coal, then, sort of the net zero automatically improves. And that's what we can focus on, right? In terms of the emissions. So can I capture the steam and, sort of use different functions to it, and, sort of those things. And not just that, to improve the net zero, coal is also connected to water. So if you go beyond net zero and you look at water, there's a huge amount of stuff that coal-based thermal power plants can look at if they really start innovating on the cooling technologies also. Yes, Rajesh, your hand has come up again. Yeah. Okay.
No, I'm not raising my
Okay.
hand. No.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, so it must be something technical. That's fine. Yeah. Okay. Okay. And then scope 3 emissions, indirect emissions from suppliers or customers are especially hard to measure, manage, and reduce. Yes, Manvendra ji, very true that these are very, very, hard to measure, manage, and reduce. But exactly, sort of, I think so. The point where we are lacking is, the looking at the real life issues and, doing real life problem solving. So why is it that, sort of these tracking, scope 3 emissions is very difficult in India. It is hard to measure, manage, and reduce. I think so, sort of because the discussions for too long have been just price based. So now if you want to bring other, sort of dimensions into the discussions, you have to do a lot of education based stuff, right? So it's not just going to be, sort of the negotiation. I just, say that, okay, from tomorrow on, the price is going to be decided based on two more variables, but probably I need to get into much more education. an integration. I also, will need to answer the question for these suppliers that, sort of the suppliers will feel that, okay, sort of for generations now, I've been told that, it is price that matters. Today, you're starting to say something else. Is this an excuse to throw me out of business? And are you trying to get new people into the business? It's going to be a, sorry, it's going to be a very, very normal fear on their part that must be addressed, right? So this is where leadership, sort of starts coming in. It's not just technology, leadership. Are there ways that I can actually incentivize, sort of, I may not, so I mean, I don't want to, use the term finance directly, but can I incentivize them to use it? By incentivizing, I'm not saying that this thing, but what if I say that, okay, sort of, we are going to help you? Because ultimately, sort of, it is my value chain and I want the value chain to improve. So I'm going to help you. I may not be able to help you directly in terms of money upfront as an investment, but for those who can find ways of improving, even though it's a conceptual piece and you find ways of improving, I am willing to give you a better price, which means that I. So what I was saying was that working with suppliers. So if I move away from the subsidy route and I say that sort of what I want to do with you guys is that sort of I want to sort of sort of give you a better price. So I may not be able to give you finance for investment, upfront, but what I can probably do is, sort of what to say. I can give you a better price in terms of those who are going to be better performing in terms of data sharing, working in collaboration, trying to, take the entire value chain ahead. If I can set that culture up in my value chain, I think so, sort of my investment need is going to be much lower. And what we are then looking at is we're looking at disrupting the market. And so, sort of we're looking at a growth oriented mindset rather than, sort of a very simple mindset. Yeah, so there's a question from Ravinder ji, and yes, guys. And so while I go to the question of Ravinder ji, sort of we really value your feedback. So the feedback form is going to come up soon. And for those who are interested in this opportunity that I am Kashipur and P Manifold EV Academy, we are curating together is this Net Zero Sustainability Leadership Program, Strategy and Sustainable Leadership Program. And so, you can scan this QR to know more about it. And in the meantime, sort of, yeah, so most of you probably would have got the feedback by now, the feedback form. So Ravindra ji is asking a question that any construction in India, like building, road infra, tunnel, dams, rail construction, how to manage their net zero challenges or scale. So actually, Ravindra ji, I think so, sort of, so I don't know if you are from that industry or not, but I think so the real estate and construction and infrastructure industries are generally believed to, we are thinking that, sort of they are not doing enough in terms of net zero. Uh, Actually, in terms of recyclability, they are very high, very high. So, sort of in an average construction now, old buildings, sort of especially flats on wherever they are being raised down now, we find that, sort of a simple illiterate contractor and an illiterate worker has been trained that any piece of metal, any brick, and such materials do not go waste. We are able to reclaim them and we are able to sort of reutilize most of it, reuse it, not even recycle it, reuse it in a big way, in these industries itself. So generally, sort of in these industries, the whole level of net zero is very high. So, we are replacing like more energy intensive industries like carbon with, like, say, having more glass and steel based structures, right? So what we are calling the IGBC, the Indian Green Building Council, sort of those. So IGBC, sort of itself is a very, very good framework to use, sort of this thing, which is, sort of part of the whole, the Green Building Council, the international, sort of green construction alliance. So, sort of they themselves, sort of this thing in terms of tunnel, dams, rail construction, mining industries, sort of those type of industries. Again, sort of, so one of the issues that, probably we need to push is the first form should be efficiency. if I can material efficiency, then probably, sort of the material miles that I am using, sort of that itself, becomes very useful for me. Not just that, what I can also do is that, sort of if I am also energy efficient, it becomes even better for me, because then, sort of what I'm able to do is that energy efficiency means that, sort of my dependence on fossil fuel based energy production is reducing. So, it becomes even better. So, where we have scant science right now. So the science is not very rich there, but in terms of, sort of the whole net zero is, if we can do a mass balance equation, that's where it is going to turn very good. So, sort of, so we are looking for major sort of major disruption to come through in the next 5 to 10 years. So we are already moved away from, sort of destructive to additive manufacturing, sort of which brings zero waste into the picture. And now we are saying that, okay, can we go down to molecular level, as close as possible to molecular level, sort of recycling. And as we are able to push the boundaries there, a lot of these industries are going to be the first to benefit, right? So in road, infra, tunnel, dams, rail construction, can we use composites? And if these composites can be used in ways that they are reusable, right? So what we have already been able to do is we moved from, sort of constructed side to prefabricated, from prefabricated to pre-engineered. So that distance has already been traveled in most projects. And now from re-engineered, we are saying, okay, can we make them build to recycle, build to, dismantle, recycle, reuse, that stuff. So that part of design is now, coming in and taking over. That's where it is. Yeah. I hope, that helps you in terms of, yeah, answer. Lena has a question. Lena Rose Raju. I want to study the impact on profitability when corporations transition to renewable energy sources. As BRSR reports were mandatory only by 2022, taking 3 years data to study the trend. Is it the right way to proceed? Okay, so Lena, what I'll say is, so this is a academic researcher's question. So, sort of interesting. Yes, you want to do it, and BRSR reports have very recently been this thing. So, well, why is it that BRSR also is now mandated only for few companies and not for all? Right? Your problem is very similar to that. So, most organizations were not looking at data of this type. So most organizations were not aware that this data would become important to them. And because we were not keyed into the global trends already at that time, we had not started to collect data. So it's now that when we were starting to collect data, we were looking at, so if you can find sources in the public disclosures by this firm, or if these firms are willing to share this thing, this data with you, uh, provided, sort of they see some benefit in it, that's when they're going to share this data with you. Then probably can you backtrack this data and collect it? That's the only thing. So, sort of, so if you have BRSR data is one form, you're seeing it, but the organizations don't, sort of produce BRSR data. I need to have a backup data which leads to my BRSR calculations and my BRSR data. So if you can focus on where does the BRSR data comes from, and was that being reported in some way earlier, and in case if it was not being reported directly, was it being reported indirectly, and is there a way to calculate it? I know it's a difficult task. I know it's a Herculean task. I also know that it's a very time and effort intensive task, but that may be one of the best ways to do it. Right. That's the only thing that I can tell you right now, Lena. But yes, a lot of consultants are working on this thing that, sort of if to get into export markets and other things, I need a net zero certification or a carbon emission certification, but I want to start today. So they are already trying to figure out this thing that, okay, how do I use past data to get a certification in least possible time, so that my Indian firms or wherever I am located geographically, they can, sort of be abreast with global firms on net zero sustainability, ESG, or whatever, framework they're using, GRI or whatever, right? So that is already, a lot of consultants are on the job, and I think so, researchers can also crack this thing. Yeah. Are there any more things in the chat? Let me just see. Okay. Yeah. So there's Link, and Pallavi has a question. Pallavi, hi Pallavi, good to see you again. And Pallavi has this question that what about emissions that has left the company and reaches the consumers? Whose liability is that? as in the vehicles or electronic appliances, the product life cycle ends once it leaves the company, and then when the consumer takes it, there are emissions. So who's it liable? So this is exactly, Pallavi, where I think so, sort of the likes of Rivian and sort of the likes of Lucid, who are the net zero disruptors. What they're doing is sort of their mastery on scope 3, indirect emissions, sort of emissions from suppliers, emissions, use based emissions, usage based emissions. How do you really work on that? Is sort of the main thing that is there, and which could mean that sort of it could be sort of just like if we go back to the 80s when we were introducing new foodstuffs into the market, right? So when soya bean was introduced as Vital Soya Flour by Britannia, so they almost went to a household campaign on teaching how it is to be done. Or when Maggie was launched in India, right? So they did a household campaign of how to use Maggie in this thing, right? And there are many such things, even like government trying to push up the use of eggs with the campaign of the National Egg Coordination Council. So, sort of probably this is the platform stuff that we need to do that, okay, sort of what can users do? And not just that, sort of I'll again want to bring to notice is that, sort of the Indian government has made some very, very interesting, sort of things, discover, sort of headways, like, sort of the way we have moved from incandescent line to CFL to, sort of the new LED lighting. I think so, sort of, so different modes are available. It could be education based, it could be, sort of a government push based, and many things are possible. But what I'll prefer building a business model like Lucid and Rivian, which works on reducing the emissions at the usage at the user level itself. I think so. That's what I will always hold dear to me, and I will say that's first because that's very very easy to do, and that's part of my business. So I don't need to train anybody for it, and sort of it comes in naturally to the business. Right, guys? I hope I've handled everything. Yes, I don't see any more questions in the Q&A. So, guys, if you want to discuss anything, please feel free. I'm here, and you can always, sort of feel free to discuss whatever you want about it. Yeah. Should we just call it a day over here? Swanant, I guess it's back to you.
Yes, sir. I guess we can call it a day. There are no more questions left. I'll take this moment to thank you, sir, for taking the time for this session and for delivering such an insightful class to the participants. And also a very warm thank you for the participants for taking the time to attend this class. And thank you for making this class very interactive and asking some tough questions to the professor and picking his brains. So thank you, everyone.